Hello, hello. Welcome everybody to episode 96 of the No Normal Show for Thursday, March 11th, brought to you by Revive Health. This is our weekly deep dive into how hospital and health system marketers can navigate what we call the no normal. I'm Chris Bevelo, Health Systems Practice Lead at Revive Health, and your host for the show. I'm joined, as always, by Chase Kleckner, who is Senior Marketing Manager at Revive Health and our show's producer. Hey, Chase.
Good, Chris. Excited about today's conversation.
I am as well, and we are happy to welcome Kathy Winn, who is our guest today. Kathy is Vice President, Strategic Marketing at LifePoint. At LifePoint, she leads markets in defining marketing and business development strategies that support growth, enhance service line development for the company's hospitals and physician practices, apply healthcare analytics and data to drive results, and facilitate the sharing of best practices system-wide. During her time at LifePoint Health, she has led the transformation of marketing to a strategic resource for organizational operations. Kathy brings over 20 years of marketing and leadership experience to the role, including tenure with national and regional healthcare organizations representing hospitals, private multi-specialty practices, and health insurance. She has dedicated her personal career to marketing and business development, helping organizations reach targeted decision makers, educating consumers, and building brands. Kathy, hello.
Hello.
It is so nice to have you with us.
Great. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, we're going to dive into a lot of stuff here. Let me get through some housekeeping notes, and then we'll start a great conversation. If you are new to this show, this is where we share industry trends, research, stories from people like Kathy from within healthcare, from people from outside of healthcare, anything that we think would be helpful to health system marketers and communicators in navigating that no normal. If you want to know more what we mean by the no normal, key principles, we've written about it. We are still in the no normal. We've been in it for, oh boy, a year. Could be another year, who knows? So we're something we're going to have to be grappling with for a while anyway. Check out our blog post. You can find a link to that if you're live with us today on the show in the chat function. If you are live with us today, use that chat function to look for links that Chase will post, just like that blog post I mentioned. Also use it to connect with other attendees of the show live. You can talk to each other in the chat. We encourage that. However, if you have a question that you'd like us to answer in the show, for Kathy, for myself, for Chase, for any of us, please put that in the Q&A queue. That's what we monitor for questions that we answer. We may answer them as we go. We have time at the end. Just make sure they end up in the Q&A function of Zoom. If you are not with us live, or even if you are, remember you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. We also post a recording of this video show by the end of the day. You can find that recording as well as all past shows on our website at thinkrevivehealth.com/no-normal. You can also find all of our COVID-19 related content, of which there are research studies, reports, blog posts, just pretty much anything you'd want. We're still putting out about 1 or 2 things a week on this, and that is all at thinkrevivehealth.com/COVID-19. So check all of that out. We encourage you to post questions as we go. That helps make sure that we are connecting with our audience in the best way possible. All right, so Kathy, we have a lot to talk about. You sit in a unique seat given LifePoint and the footprint you have across the country, 88 hospitals, 29 states. We're going to dive into what that means in terms of COVID. We're going to talk about this in terms of marketing strategy. But first, let's just talk about you. How are you doing with COVID? How's your family doing? It's good to kind of check in with folks before we get into the business side of everything.
Yeah, thanks. I think given that we are just celebrating kind of that 1-year milestone with COVID, I feel pretty fortunate that, my kids are in school in person. I've got family members who've been vaccinated appropriately across the country. So I think, overall, just in terms of how personally we're doing, we're making it work. We talk a lot about resiliency in my household and try to have some opportunity to focus on some of those positive pieces. But it's definitely been an interesting time, both personally and professionally.
That is true. And I forgot, I see a lot of stories about kind of the 1 year anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And I always get confused. Is this the day that the NBA shut down, or is it the day before? Because wasn't there, I can't remember when former President Trump gave the press conference. We found out about Tom Hanks
Mm-hmm.
and the NBA shut down. Was that all on the same day? Was that the 11th a year ago? I can't even remember. Chase, we should have known that. We should have been ready. We happened to have the show on the 1 year anniversary. We totally blew it.
Yeah,
It was
we
March
are
11th. NBA
March
shut
11th.
down.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah, we're celebrating. We're recognizing our first COVID patient in March at any of our facilities across the country. So it definitely has been one full year of a lot of change across the country.
Yeah, and it is, it's so interesting. We talk about this each show, but certainly things seem to be going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
The light at the end of the tunnel. For every 5 stories, though, there's the one that says, oh my gosh, it's too early to relax. Things could go really bad again if we, take this too easy. And we're seeing states, in fact, we'll talk a little bit about that because you have some of your facilities in some of these states that have just said, we're no more masks and it's all good. I'm a TikTok fan. It's kind of a joke, but I am a TikTok fan. And I saw TikTok yesterday and it just was scanning this open, I don't know, it must have been a huge bar, but it was like the patio area, probably 200 people. And it says, here's Texas. And it was just the servers are walking by with masks. Nobody else. It looked like there's no such thing as COVID-19. And that's a little worrisome too. So we're not quite out of the woods. That's probably a fair statement, right? So
I think we'd all agree.
Yes. Yeah. My little personal experience is we just in Minnesota opened up to the category that I can actually get a vaccine in. But as I was joking, Kathy, I've also been trying to get a PS5 since November, and the race is on to see which one I get first. Yesterday, I was in my getting my eyes checked, and I was waiting. He had dilated them, right? So 15 minutes, and I was on my hospital's website, and I figured out how to get in and actually schedule one. And of course, it came up and said, sorry, all the things are full. I tried a couple other hospitals in our system, full. And then I thought it said check again Friday. I'm like, I better capture that or I will forget to check Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to click it again just to get a screenshot of the sorry, none are available. And one came up and I freaked out. It was like for 3:45 yesterday. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta get in. And then all the way at the end, it was the same experience as, by the way, if you ever get a PS5 in your shopping cart at Best Buy. That doesn't mean anything until you've actually checked out. So at the end, it said, sorry, there's been a problem. We've lost your reservation. And then I was out. So this is my story, along with many other people, obviously. Look in that refresh, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that across the country, just in different spaces. And even here in the Nashville area, same experiences as individuals are trying to get their families vaccinated and trying to do what they can to make sure that everyone stays safe.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about that. Let's pivot into LifePoint and your role there. I mentioned, obviously, you've got 88 hospitals. I'm sure many more facilities beyond that, 29 states. Just give us a little background to start with on LifePoint in what makes you all unique, and then we'll get into some more specifics.
So LifePoint, as you mentioned, 88 hospitals, 29 states. We are an integrated care delivery model. We like to refer to ourselves as the leader in community-based care. So our roots are really in the rural healthcare space, but we've really grown over the past few years, especially, and really transitioned into more of that community healthcare provider and larger markets, more suburban markets. But we run the full gamut. We run from, the skilled nursing facilities, the freestanding imaging centers or ambulatory surgical centers, outpatient centers. We have close to 60,000 employees across the country caring for our friends and neighbors in our communities, and more than 3,000 physicians nationwide. So we have a really interesting view of all the things that are happening with the current pandemic, obviously, as things transition across the country.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? Do you want to talk about, yeah, and we want to talk about, I think what's really interesting about your situation, Kathy, is obviously there's a lot we're going to dive into around COVID-19, but also just in general, how you manage that kind of system in the way you've just described from marketing and strategy and all of that. Let's start actually with COVID. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges or maybe some of the ways in which the way LifePoint extends across that broad footprint. Maybe there's been some things that have been beneficial the way you're structured, but I would imagine there's also a pretty significant set of challenges.
Yeah, the challenges obviously are pretty expansive. I mean, when you think about operating in 29 different states with 29 different state directives in terms of when you can do surgeries, when you can't do surgeries, if you're wearing masks, if you're not wearing masks, all of those pieces that really come into play, plus just the physical geographic distance between facilities and, making sure that they have the right supplies, leadership at each of those, staffing challenges at those opportunities. So I think from an operations standpoint, the team at LifePoint rose to a level that I've just never experienced before in terms of providing the level of support from a clinical, from an operational, from that supply chain perspective. It was pretty fascinating to sit on the inside and watch those pieces pull together very, very quickly overnight to be able to support the facilities in whatever space they were in that day. And we had constant gating calls where we would get together with division leadership and key stakeholders, much like all of our peers, trying to figure out how we do this well. How do we provide the support that our teams in the field needed? And again, the operations and the clinical teams and the support that they provided to the markets and the way that our local hospitals rose to the occasion is really, it's quite astounding. It just really came together. You always practice and train for these opportunities and really try to have your ducks in a row so that things go as planned, and they never go as planned. But the way that the teams from an operational and clinical perspective came to the table to help support the facilities, to make sure that they had what they needed, and the facilities supported each other, which was fascinating to watch. It was really something. From a marketing and communications perspective, the challenges for us were really, how do we support those teams in the field when we have facilities in Texas who maybe hadn't seen their first COVID patient, but our first COVID patient was actually in South Carolina. And so everyone was in a different space at a different time. And so how do you manage through that piece and make sure that we're providing the information that they need on a timely basis, very quickly, and providing the support to help them navigate through the challenges, while making sure we're supporting those who maybe aren't even in the same space. And early on in the pandemic, it really did kind of flow across the country in a pretty interesting fashion. And so I think there were some states, ours and others, that just kind of thought it was an East Coast thing. And so their space was a little bit different.
Yeah. So I mean, we've spent a lot of time recently talking about vaccines alone and the challenges that hospitals and health systems face. And then you can go back over everything else with COVID, right? It's hard for me to even imagine how a system like LifePoint with facilities everywhere, right? Basically, like, you can multiply the challenge times 88 or 29 or whatever it is. It's hard to even fathom how to manage all that when you think about the problems for one hospital or one health system. When you think back, Kathy, over the past year, just let your mind go for a second. What was the issue that pops out the most that was like, yeah, that cost me some hours of sleep? That, from a marketing communication standpoint, I'll never forget that, and how we had to grapple with that. What is the thing that just like rises above everything else?
I don't think I've slept well in a year. So that's really hard. That's
Relatively
really hard,
speaking.
right? We're all very tired.
That's right.
I think for us and for our marketing team here at our health support center, which is where we're based, I think it really was, how do we support our local teams in the field who we're tired, but they are dealing day in and day out with trying to care for, again, their friends, neighbors, and families. And so there's also an emotional connection for them. And so how can we support them? What can we do here while we sit in our office, or for several months while we sat in our home offices, but yet they still had to be on site, right? There was no vaccine at that point. They still showed up every day. So how do we support them? What were the things that we could take off their plate that we knew we still needed to do to keep the doors open and to keep informing our friends and neighbors of what was going on, and making those changes real time. And the communications team really did such a tremendous job and continue to do a tremendous job in hearing the needs of the markets and making tools real time as we deployed them. And I think one of the great things about being a system as widespread and as large as we are is that we take learnings from other markets. And so while we did see that progression across the country, it also gave us an opportunity to say, we did this over here, and let's make, from a marketing communication standpoint, let's make a few tweaks and changes so that when it comes to this market over here, it's more refined. So I think we do that really well, is we take that feedback from our local communities and then try to localize it for the rest of our hospitals.
So obviously COVID has been the biggest challenge for many people, maybe in their lifetimes in this work. But it's just kind of it's just an added challenge, I think, to what you have to deal with in terms of balancing, standardizing what you want to do, being effective, having benchmarks and best practices, but also being really locally focused, right? So talk to us about your philosophy in how you do that. How do you just mentioned like the benefit of having a bunch of different sites across the country in terms of COVID, but just in general with marketing and communications, how do you try to have the best of both worlds?
So we do try to standardize our marketing as appropriate, but we do like to say we standardize, but we localize. So what we mean by that is we do have standard messages from a marketing standpoint that maybe as we're talking about different service lines, we try to deploy across some of those paid media opportunities. But we know that there are nuances in each of our communities that make them unique and special. And so how do you honor some of those opportunities as well? So we learned early on, you don't put, pine trees in Lake Havasu, Arizona, there, or, when we're representing Western Plains Medical Complex in Kansas, we shouldn't put the hills of North Carolina, right? So we try to do our best to represent our communities while finding those opportunities to leverage our scale, because there are efficiencies that we can experience. And I think the thing that we do bring to the table is the leveraging of tools, technology, and resources that perhaps some smaller markets wouldn't normally have if they were independent and on their own, but also those best practices. So we have a wide tool chest we can pull from that we know this has worked in another market, and we can make tweaks and changes and deploy that same resource or something similar in another space. So we're not always starting from zero. We can build on things that we have seen work and sometimes seen not do as well as we would like. But I think we do a pretty good job of aligning those opportunities to help support our markets.
So there's another twist here, but I wonder to what degree it is a challenge or, again, a benefit for you. So everything you described makes a lot of sense. And you can think of systems that are across regions in the country, so like a Kaiser Permanente or an Intermountain. They're the same challenges, right? You're not going to put the pine trees of northern Utah. Hopefully, I'm getting my geography right. If you're Intermountain in an Arizona facility right? But they also have a singular brand. Mm-hmm. They are a branded house. You're a house of brands. So what does that twist add or subtract, or how does that play into all of this?
That's part of the reason we don't sleep very much on the team. We're constantly changing out logos. No, it adds a layer of complexity and a layer of difficulty for us as we try to standardize as much as we possibly can, again, for those efficiency sakes. Because some, the colors, the branding, the logos, there's a lot of different variations that come in there. So we try to find opportunities to align brands closely, but maybe they're the same PMS colors in the logos, or maybe the fonts. We have opportunities to align fonts. We try to find small ways that make it a little bit easier to deploy those efficiencies across the board. But I think it's just something that we have come to just learn how to scale, and just know that when we do, a set of digital ads, whereas if you had one single solitary brand, you may do 6 different sizes of those digital ads. Well, we do 6 times 88. So it's just something that we build into our size and scale, and when we're trying to scale those resources across the organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. So super complex. You just barely, I'm sure, scratched the surface of the way you have to manage this. At the same time, I know when you and I talked with Chase early on, another focus of yours is really trying to elevate the role of marketing overall in the organization, how it's valued, how it shows up, which also must be difficult across 88 locations. So talk to us a little bit about your philosophy there, the idea of moving marketing from kind of order takers to a strategic partner.
So when I first came to LifePoint, that was really where our team was, just a development of the evolution of the department, and really very much kind of let us help you. You tell us what you need, we'll create it and we'll send it out to you. Over the past few years, we've done a great job, I think, of hiring the right people, aligning it with the strategic vision of the organization, as well as the individual strategic plans for each of the markets. We've created processes where we're engaged in the strategic planning process at each of those local facilities, creating marketing and communications plans that support those strategies, engaging the CEOs in the markets around those plans, and really trying to help our teams in the field showcase what they do best. We've got some great talent in the field who are very strategic in their thinking and are a great resource for our CEOs in the field to help them understand, oh, you're trying to do this, here's how we can align marketing and communication strategies alongside that. So really trying to help elevate them any chance we can. I think we've been successful in doing that over the past few years, in part because we have executive leadership here who supports us and believes in what we do as well. I think that is a big gap filler. If we didn't have that, I don't think we'd be nearly as far along as we are. And they position us, they help to position us as, these are the strategic marketing team leaders. And there is an art and a science to marketing, and we'll help you understand that. But we do have resources, tools, and strategies, even though we may not agree all the time, that will help to further along the business objectives. So I think executive leadership has been a tremendous asset for us. And then hiring and helping to coach those individuals in the field, and really sometimes, to be honest, just getting out of their way, helping to position them as the leaders that they are, and helping them when they need support with their leadership to say, this is a great idea. Here's some strategies that really can help further your objectives.
Well, that's terrific to hear. I mean, it's something that we've been on a soapbox on for years. It's kind of our mission, and my personal mission, our agency's mission. It's a lot of people's mission to elevate marketing. And I think you hit on one of the keys to success for that, and that is leadership support. Because it's really hard to try to do what you're doing and what you're describing if leadership is fighting that or doesn't understand it. Sounds like you have great system support where you're at, but I would imagine you still have maybe a little bit of a bell curve going on out there with 88 CEOs. Are there still places where there's a challenge with a site leader who doesn't understand what you're trying to do, or, I'd imagine that you're still kind of working through some folks. Is that a fair statement? You don't have to call anybody out. But...
We always have the opportunity to engage differently with our leaders.
There you go. Perfect.
I think that we are extremely fortunate in that we have a lot of really terrific relationships with CEOs who see the value in marketing. And then we have some leaders who have very passionate beliefs about what marketing is, right? And so it's just our responsibility to make sure that we bring them along on our journey. And again, I think it does start, there's a level set in the beginning when when a leader comes to LifePoint. We have a really great, robust program where we do training, orientation for new CEOs, COOs, CNOs, CFOs. And marketing has an opportunity to speak to all of those individuals. And so we give our philosophy. We come and we present our philosophy about marketing, and we talk a lot about what marketing is, and we talk a lot about what marketing isn't, and really try to take that opportunity to say, we won't always agree, but let's at least agree to talk about it. And here's why. So, if you're talking to a CFO, we've found that a lot of the CFOs really respond well to our strategy around measuring marketing. Maybe this is the first time they've had that experience. And so that's their language, right? CEOs, the same thing. They have that financial background. The CNOs have a more clinical space sometimes, or CMOs. They really want to talk about how are we leveraging our quality in our markets? How do we educate consumers? So really just trying to educate them from the very beginning. And then, we just work on it. We usually travel. We've got team members who go out and travel and support our markets and really understand. There's something about walking through the halls of a hospital to understand that community. That's obviously not happened in the past year, but we look forward to doing that because that's an opportunity for us to really engage differently and understand the nuances of each of our markets.
That's great. One of the to build on that, one of the themes we've heard over the past 6 months, I would say, from guests like you have been on, is that COVID-19, for all the terribleness that it's brought, it has opened up opportunities for marketing to step into leadership role more than maybe before, whether that's because for most of it's been a crisis communication situation and you have to be there. But also in the spring and summer of last year, everybody was closed down. They had to open back up again. And all of a sudden, we've always been here to drive volumes. But all of a sudden, there was this, holy cow, we need volumes now. Where's marketing? So is that something that you've seen as well, that you've had a lot of success, even, separate from COVID, but has COVID opened the door even more to elevate marketing for you?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We've told our teams in the field that, marketing and communications has never been as visible in our organization and truly in the industry as it has been in the last year. And the importance and the value of what we do each and every day has really been elevated. So we absolutely, organizationally, in each of our markets, it has what you just said. It has showed our leadership in the field, maybe those who didn't really understand the value of what we bring to the table, or just had never really experienced it. Maybe there was a change in personnel or just a change in how we do things. But it's really brought to light the value of what we bring and how we engage with consumers, like you said, during the crisis communications piece, but also how do we engage with consumers as the crisis subsides or lessens? How do we engage with them differently to help them understand the importance of getting the care that they need? So it's that full continuum of support. And so it's a great opportunity to make sure we continue to reinforce moving forward that we are that strategic partner. And so hopefully we can continue the same pace at which we've been seeing that engagement.
That's great. That's great. So there's a couple of questions before we get to them. One last thing on this topic. So you've had great success, really elevating marketing from a strategic standpoint. As you look forward, what are some of your personal hopes in terms of, okay, let's keep going. Here's 2 or 3 things that I'd like to see us do more of, or better, or newly introduce in terms of that idea that marketing is a strategic partner.
I think this is our opportunity to continue to showcase the results as we move into this next phase, and to really have a conversation with our leadership in the field about the value that we just talked about. We are a very data-driven industry, obviously. We have a lot of data around a lot of things, and marketing is typically one that's hard to measure in some respects, but we have such great tools and resources available to us, and we really can measure so much of our consumer engagement these days. So this is an opportunity, I think, for all of our teams in the field and for us here at our Health Support Center to continue to show our value moving into the future, and just continue to be that strategic partner, and really engage them in a different way. I think now, we always say we gotta ask for that seat at the table. We talk a lot about the seat at the table with leadership. We've got the seat. Now, how are we going to use it? So that's our next phase. It has really accelerated. The pandemic has accelerated a lot of our strategies. I think, I've heard that kind of time and time again from our peers in the field. We've been able to do things more quickly than maybe we would have done in the past. And so I'm excited to see how that's going to be utilized to help engage patients in this next phase, to help them get the care that they need and not delay it.
All right, terrific. We've got questions I want to get to. The first one is, again, you're across 29 states, right? You mentioned maybe not all of them have a completely different vaccine approach, but it's probably safe to say that in some ways they're all different. So the question is, how are you navigating that state-by-state difference? How much of this, is handled locally versus from a centralized standpoint?
That's a great question. And it's a little bit of a blended approach. So we have still our task force that's led by our clinical leaders here on site at the Health Support Center, and they develop a lot of the strategies and the framework and guardrails around how we're going to do things, and from a clinical perspective. And what's interesting about LifePoint is that we have some really great partners that help us navigate the really complex clinical situations, like our partners at Emory, like our partners at Duke, like our partners at University of Washington. There are these great academic medical centers and teaching facilities that really help us from a clinical perspective. So we have those clinical leaders, and then we have to add in that local piece. So we just heard this morning on our huddle, one of our first practices now has vaccine, because it's all been through the hospital side. Well, now we have practices. So it's constantly changing state by state, city by city, market by market. And so we have to partner with our hospitals and our hospital leadership, with our clinical experts and our operational teams here at the Health Support Center. And like I said, it's moving parts and pieces. It changes every day. We do have all of the vaccines at some place somewhere. So we have all the communications that goes with that. It's a lot of spinning plates, but the operations and the clinical teams, I feel like I'm not answering the question terrific, because I'm not really sure how we're able to manage all of it. But I'll tell you, the pace in which we make decisions around some of these changing situations as they change, and they'll change twice before the end of the day. So, it's just keeping on track of it. Our compliance team monitors all those changing state regulations every day, all day, just to make sure that we're always aligned with what is going on in each of our markets. It's a challenge for sure, but it's one that they definitely have met.
Terrific. Okay, so the next question is one of my favorite questions, because it's age old, and I think it'll never go away. So I love hearing different answers to it, and that is, obviously LifePoint is a brand that isn't taken to market to consumers, I don't think, but you can speak to it at the LifePoint level. But I think thinking about it more from your individual brand sites, what's the balance between brand and service line for you? And, I assume it varies, but
Mhm.
how do you think about that? How do you, at least philosophically or strategically, try to balance that?
That's a great question. I think for a long time we waited so very much on the service lines. We were very much service line focused, and for some of our markets that are in more small communities or smaller facilities, they may not have a lot of dollars for branding. I think that through this experience, this pandemic experience, we have done such a tremendous job in positioning our brands through communications materials and earned media opportunities, that I think we are leveraging brand more moving forward. And service lines will always play a really big part for us. That's what we engage our consumers around, especially in most of our markets. But I think that you can't not focus on your brand as well. So it's not the LifePoint brand that we're talking about, the consumer brand, but for each of the markets. And it does differ in our communities. If they're a sole provider and there are not another healthcare delivery vehicle within hours, you may not need to spend as much time on that brand piece. And it's more about the services that the consumers can get there in the market. But in some of our markets, there are 3, 4, 5 really strong competitors, and there our brand probably needs to be promoted more. So it is a little bit of a gradient scale, depending on what the needs of the market are.
All right, great. So last question, and this is also something that we've been monitoring really since the spring, because everybody recognized, folks aren't coming back. Actually, that's not necessarily true. When we reopened, most of our clients anyway filled back up pretty quickly, but most of that was from the bottled up demand that people couldn't get in. There's constantly been reporting on, research on, and fear of a reluctance for people to come back in, whether it's COVID, fear of COVID, whether it's financial difficulties and not wanting to even put out, $500 for deductible, whatever it is. How are you guys seeing delaying care as a challenge? And how have you seen it change?
Yeah, it is, and that's an interesting piece about being in so many different states, that we're in a different space in every different market that we have. So we may have some markets where patients have chosen to come back for those electives, and they're moving along just not where they were before, but they definitely have bounced back in terms of utilizing healthcare services. And then we have some markets where the consumers are really hesitant to come back for even screenings and that kind of thing. And so for us, we're undertaking an additional round of consumer perception research right now, where we can, again, this is a great example of our size and scale, we can go to those different markets, and we're identifying markets where we've seen patients more hesitant to come back and seen patients more easily come back. And then what is the difference in the consumer sentiment between those two? Can we identify key metrics? Is it related to safety? Is it related to insurance? Is it related to visitor restrictions? Hopefully we can identify some of those key messages that then we can take to our other markets. So that's a great example of how we can leverage our size and scale to help some of those other markets. But we really are all across the board. It just kind of depends on the market and how hard did COVID hit them? What was the experience, and what was their media like in that market? What were their state requirements like in that market? All of those pieces will be layered over the top of the consumer research to see how we can affect some of those changes in consumer behaviors, which is what we believe truly is happening. Less of a fear about COVID, more just changes in consumer behaviors, and how can we address those?
Yeah, and the fear, I think, to that point, is that some of these will lock in. Some of these behavior changes will lock in. It just reminds me so much of, 2008, 2009, when the Great Recession hit, and it was really the first time in my experience, and that healthcare actually felt the impact of an economic downturn. Normally, people got sick, they came in, but because of the depth of the Great Reception, how many people hit, how hard it hit them, and because there was more money on the line for most people. You know, back in the day, I had a $10 copay. It didn't matter whether I lost my job or not, or I was worried about that. 2009, so many people just couldn't do it. There was a real drag on care. People cutting their pills in half, skipping their appointments, and that stuck for a while. And I think that is the fear, right? That you're talking to, that some of these behaviors that just because COVID's in front of us, people will go like, well, hey, you know, I got by okay without my diabetes consult. So maybe I just won't go every 6 months or every year. I'll just, you know, go when I feel like it. And that's going to be a long-term problem for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we have one more question. I'm not even sure. I'm going to ask it, but if you don't have anything, we might be able to think about this after the podcast. The question is whether you have anything you can share that speaks maybe more in detail, gives a little more background on your approach to elevating marketing in terms of its value in the organization. If you have, maybe you have a presentation that you've done in the past, maybe you've got something written up. If not, I think we could think creatively about how to provide that after the fact. But just want to give you an opportunity. If there is something you want to share, we can distribute it to folks.
Yeah, I'll have to think about, you know, I think it's an aggregate situation. So we do attack it, if you will. It's something we consciously do. And it is always in every presentation that we do in terms of how we align and how we position ourselves. And we actually say words like, we used to be your flyer department. I mean, we say, we tell them what we used to do, and we do still make flyers. Let's just be transparent. When we want to make sure it's on brand, right? That's what we do. We make your flyers, but we are also your strategic partner that sits at the elbow of the CEO to help drive their strategies. And so I think it's just that constant drumbeat of what our role really is in the organization, so that we're not, you know, the first place that comes and asks us to, you know, do table tents for the cafeteria or whatever that is. We really are a strategic resource that can make a difference in the bottom line of the hospital, as well as promoting the quality of care in our community. So I think it's just that constant, steady drumbeat of always positioning ourselves. But I'll think about that, and if there's something that we can share. We've done a lot of different things. We created an internal leadership institute for some of our marketing and communications folks who wanted to grow. We're really big, just as an organization, LifePoint is very big on professional development. We have great professional development resources, engaging people to be leaders in their communities, and providing them the skill set and the time to go out and do that. So I think it's kind of a combined approach for us.
Yeah, I knew that would be a hard one to answer, because it's not like you've created a deck internally that says, here's how we're going to elevate ourselves in the eyes of you, our leadership. Like, you wouldn't ever explicitly do that. But there are, you know, people give panel presentations and things. So that's what I'm thinking. Maybe we come back around and figure out how to do a webinar or something, because we've heard so much about that. I would love to hear more from you and others like you that have been able to elevate in the face of COVID even more than you were doing before. So let's hold that in our back pocket, and maybe we can come back around to that. But with that, I think it's a great place to wrap, Kathy.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. That was fantastic background and information. And again, like, hopefully you'll get some sleep as we move deeper into 2021.
One day.
I don't know.
One day.
I feel like your situation, forgetting about COVID, has got to have an impact on your sleep with all of that complexity. So I can only imagine how it's been the last year. So stay healthy. How about that? For
You too.
Chase, thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, if you want us to cover something, let us know. Throw it in the chat right now. You can email us as well at nonormal@thinkrevivehealth.com. We want to be able to make sure we're hitting all the things that are important to our listeners. Remember to visit thinkrevivehealth.com/COVID-19 for a recording of today's episode and all of the content we have related to the pandemic. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes And until next week, good luck out there in the no normal. Thanks for joining.